Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And thank you all for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the second house in astrology as the seat of values. Listen as we discuss the Kriya Yoga hierarchy of values and the significance of knowing what is essential. In this show, we will explore Matthew 6:19, "Lay not up for yourselves treasure upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal," to substantiate a proper sense of spiritual treasure. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and live abundantly. Swami, I see the title of today's show is Where and What is Your Treasure? So what is it that you would like our listeners to understand about this particular title?
Well, like we said, the second house in astrology is associated with values. In the natural zodiac, the second sign, and therefore the second house, is assigned to Taurus, and the key phrase of Taurus is, I have. Astrology gives us a where our treasure can be found that is out of this world, found far beyond the solar system in the zodiacal sign of Taurus. Abiding in the zodiac there wouldn't be anything visible and tangible or invisible and tangible that would be of any use to one in spiritual identity. And so in this show, I really think we want to focus on what is valuable to me, because whatever it is I find valuable or important is going to give me some clues, because what surrounds me is within me. Consciousness is experience. So whatever it is I am conscious of is oftentimes what it is that I will draw to me.
I'd like to talk a bit more about that word where. And we've been talking a lot in our shows about the obstructions, and one of them being time and space and here and there, now and then. So I think that's very interesting, using the word where and then the word what in relationship to the treasure.
Yeah, and trying to keep in sync with the concept of a spiritual science. It has an evidence procedure, and that we're working with laws and principles. Like we had said, to material identity, which would be anything that was visible and tangible, food and water seem essential. To astral mental identity, which is invisible but tangible, air seems essential. And then to spiritual identity, which is invisible and intangible, then prana, the life force, the grace of God or spirit, is essential, because like attracts like. And so the physical world is a mental image, but the more divinely mental, the more harmonious and indestructible it will appear. Here we're working on raising consciousness from identifying with what's visible and tangible, physical consciousness, to what's invisible but tangible, astral mental consciousness, and eventually to what is invisible but intangible, spiritual consciousness. Because we can't really have the divine mind if we don't have association or identification with the invisible spiritual body.
So I think we all know what the word treasure means in our material sense, but could you give us a description as to what you think treasure means in a spiritual sense?
Well, again, I think it's whatever it is that we esteem as valuable. And as we start to rise in our awareness and our identity comes out of what's visible and tangible, what's invisible and intangible, you come out of matter and mind, you come out of duality, and now you are in the one. Now, spirit is whole, it's complete. You're no longer searching, you're not looking for something, you're not looking to get rid of anything. You rest. My peace, you abide in the perfection of being. You live and move and have your being in this one perfect divine consciousness.
Swami, you had mentioned earlier about Taurus and the second house and astrology. Wondering maybe if you could just maybe dig a little deeper with that for our listeners.
Yeah, here we're trying to paint a little picture for the where. And rather than I have money in the bank, which is visible and tangible, or even say, for example, I have a belief in God, which is invisible but tangible, now we have a belief in astrology, and it's invisible and tangible, but it is out of this world. Everything that we're doing here is trying to educate thought up to spiritual apprehension. And it kind of gives you something that you can almost grab onto that will enable you to lift yourself off of the earth, out of the earth's atmosphere, where we can begin to live above material sense. And instead of, I have material possessions, or I have these great ideas and thoughts, it is, I have awareness of the perfection of being, the one perfect divine life, the divine creation. And when that becomes the most important thing to you, it becomes much easier to surrender your whole sense of self to this one perfect divine creation.
Well, you had mentioned just a few minutes ago about lifting our thoughts to the spiritual apprehension. But we're talking about not our mortal thoughts, right? Because I don't think we can get there with the five sense mind. We have to be at a different place to be able to make that happen. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we talk about purifying ourselves physically, mentally. We have to let go of the material moorings that keep us trapped and captured in this limited sense of self. And then at the same time, we want to make our thought buoyant so that we can start to find that place in consciousness where our thought is the same as the divine idea. That becomes the meeting point. And then we can let go of the material and the mental moorings. And we don't just disintegrate, but we now attach ourselves to spiritual identity. There's a realization. It's not a loss. It's not an annihilation of a sense of self. It's an upgrade. It's a more inclusive sense of awareness that you put off the belief that you're finite and you're mortal and personal, and then you accept you are an eternal spiritual being, but it's impersonal because there's only one and it's universal. It's infinite.
Swami, I'd like to take a closer look at the what that we were talking about and what it is that we value. Let's dig deeper with that.
When looking at what we value, in Kriya Yoga we use a hierarchy of needs. And the way that we establish it is, how long can I live without it? Because for most of us, the most important thing is life itself. And so when you're working with this hierarchy of needs, you can say, for example, I can live weeks without food. I can live days without water. I can live minutes without air, but we can't live a millisecond without the grace of God. Without the life force, we expire immediately. And so a big part of educating our thought up to spiritual apprehension is understanding this concept of putting God first. If you don't think air is important to you, how are you going to think the life force is important to you? If you think food is more important than water, say for example. Now, everything works, like we said, in these principles and laws. And if you put a want before a need, then it creates this failure force. And when you look at life today, you look at some of the things that we react as if we're in danger because somebody didn't call. You're acting as if a saber-toothed tiger just stepped into the room and is going to devour you. And we're overreacting to these things. And we talked about that in one of our shows, the whole thing of negative partisanship. We no longer disagree with our adversary, but we fear them. And so everything gets amped up and blown out of proportion, and it all starts with the simple fact that we're not thinking right. We don't have our values in perspective with how they would scientifically prove out.
So I have to ask, in the opening we said we were going to talk about the significance of knowing what is essential. So I hear what you're saying about putting God first, but I have to ask you, so why to me would that be important? Why is it essential? What is in it for us if we put God first?
Well, everything's dependent on what you plan on doing with this lifetime. If you're looking to survive and chronologically age and psychologically, spiritually remain in an underdeveloped state and live under the law of karma in this cycle of death and rebirth, then it wouldn't really matter. But if you are looking to grow psychologically and spiritually, and you want liberation from this cycle of death and rebirth, this law of karma, then you're going to need a game plan. And like we're saying, you can't just lift yourself off of the earth. You can't just declare that I'm spiritual. In development, one of the things that we always say is bad habits sets up limitation. And that proves out just about in anything. If you are involved in athletics, or if you play a musical instrument, or even in business, if you have a bad habit, the habit sets up a limitation that you don't grow beyond, you don't advance beyond it until you correct it. Well, living is the same thing. That if we have a bad living habit, if we don't think right, if we don't breathe right, if we're not hydrated, if we don't exercise properly, then we have limitations, because how we think is what we become. Our physical body is a diagram of how we're thinking. So you can use your physical body to give you clues. You can use your physical world to give you clues as to what you're conscious of, what you think is important. And so a big part of the process is we need to purify ourselves, purge ourselves. And like you said, of all of these human concepts, beliefs, theories, we have to purge ourselves of the belief in time, space. We actually have to stop thinking. And then we have to understand that it's not my will, but it is thy will. And then give up personal sense. And in this process and in this practice, we have the benefit of realizing life is perfect. It always was. It always will be. And we begin to understand that it's a demonstrable principle, that we just have to be conscious of it and then let it perform its work. Let it express itself through us as us.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. So listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 1, Human Development and the 8 Essential Stages of Kriya Yoga. This program is a comprehensive course that will help you get your arms around the science of Kriya Yoga. It provides a clear understanding of the goals and objectives behind yoga, along with the physics of spirituality. It includes the practices, supportive concepts of Kriya Yoga, and the process in human development, apotheosis, the process of the human becoming divine. A complete guide on how to become a human in the adult state. Get the light in your soul and experience the simplicity and joy of union with the divine. This course is available in live classes at the ashram or online with 8 videos or 4 CDs. Visit our website, www.ipdtransform.com, for more information. Welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. Swami, we're just talking about the hierarchy of values and knowing what is essential. What more can you tell us about this?
Yeah, what we're talking about here is using our life experiences to help us educate our thought up to spiritual apprehension. What I have here now, an example that came from a book called We Knew Mary Baker Eddy, and this was written by Martha Wilcox. And in this lesson that she received, I'll start to read it. It starts with Luke 16:10. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. If therefore ye have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if ye have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? Now that was the end of the quote from the Bible, but now in the book, I'll continue. This is Martha Wilcox writing. Mrs. Eddy no doubt realized that at my stage of growth, I thought of creation, that is, all things, as separated into 2 groups. One group spiritual and the other group material, and that somehow I must get rid of the group I called material. But during this lesson, I caught my first glimpse of the fact that all right, useful things, which I had been calling the unrighteous mammon, were mental and represented spiritual ideas. She showed me that unless I was faithful and orderly with the objects of sense that made up my present mode of consciousness, there could never be revealed to me the truer riches or the progressive higher revelations of substance and things. That's the end of that quote. And I think this message is very consistent with what we've been teaching since the inception of Institute of Personal Development, that you really have to have respect and understanding for the oneness of everything. What we're putting out is what we're getting back, because there's only one life, and it's looking at itself, as itself, of itself, and to itself. This life is absolute goodness, absolute harmony, and it can't have any discord or destruction associated with it.
So I guess it could be a little bit confusing, because we've been talking about thoughts, and what we see in our material senses are things we want to try to overcome. And now in this quote here, she's talking about the unrighteous mammon are now mental and represents spiritual ideas. So I guess this could be a little bit confusing. Can you maybe shed some light here?
Well, I think what we've been saying is that the physical world is a mental image. Now, of course, we think that because it's visible and tangible, it's solid, that it's real. But now science has told us that's not true. Everything that we're looking at is observation dependent. And then the other thing is we judge everything based on the appearance of it. This is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. But as we educate our thought up to spiritual apprehension, we start to see everything is spirit. Everything is the one perfect divine life, revealing itself, appearing as what we think is an object, a person, a place, a thing. And so if we categorize something and we think it doesn't have any value, then we don't have to honor it or be orderly with it. Then it is disposable. But as we start to rise into the oneness, you start to have this sense of reverence for everything. And there's no such thing as a menial task or an ordinary moment. Life is perfect. But like you said earlier, it's only perfect to somebody who has come out of the mind that can't bring forth the divine image.
So it seems like you just summarized the Luke 16:11, and I'll say it again for our listeners. If therefore ye have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And here I kind of chuckled to myself because riches meaning the treasure, which is the name of our show. But it sounds like that's a pretty good summary of what you just talked about.
Yeah, I remember years ago reading something by Henry David Thoreau, and he would say something to the effect, I'll paraphrase it. He only had to see somebody do one thing, and then he could evaluate what was going on in every department of that person's life and what was happening between breakfast and dinner and what was happening in the bedroom in that person's life. And I think that's something we are aspiring towards here. And it has a lot to do with this attunement to the divine mind, attunement to the perfection of being. Perfection is a divine quality. The more divinely mental, the more harmonious and indestructible it appears. And so the more we attune ourselves to the divine, it really wouldn't matter what it is that we do it with that sense of perfection to it. But not a compulsive need for something to be a particular way, more the divine love of perfection. You do things with this love of doing whatever it is that you're doing. And it just exudes this spirit of truth, the perfection of being. That is a big part of this practice. And that's what I think Martha Wilcox was starting to understand.
So Swami, let's substantiate a proper sense of spiritual treasure and talk about the Bible verse in our summary, Matthew 6:19. And again, I'll read it for our listeners. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. This to me sounds like our humanity being really engrossed in the material world, as we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and I don't think it takes us too long to figure this out after a while. Once you start to get to the point where you're using what is outside yourself to validate yourself. It's the dynamics of any addiction. People that are addicted to money, they can never seem to have enough money. People that are addicted to drinking or drugs, smoking, sugar, you can't seem to get enough. It's all part of a dynamic. In order to stop the insanity, you start with the perfection of being, and you get rid of the belief that you're not perfect. And rather than drawing in and becoming compulsive about whatever it is that you're using to validate yourself, you begin to give off. Spiritual identity is for giving. Mortal human sense is for getting.
So how would you suggest that we have this proper sense of spiritual treasure when we're talking about the treasures upon the earth?
Well, I always think about what it says in the Bible. Love God. It's Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Now, spiritual treasure is the ultimate human experience, and it is also the changeless state of being. In spiritual identity, where all is one, nothing can ever be taken away. There's no opposition. And you abide in the peace that passes understanding. And these are things, like you said, you can't understand that with your material sense mind. And from the human perspective, we really go about this backwards. We start out and we say, I'll be happy when I get this, that, or the other thing. And then we find even when we get what it is that we think we want or we think we need, we become rapidly dissatisfied, and then eventually we want more. Again, it's this ongoing cycle of karma, the belief in two powers, that perpetuates this hypnotic trance that we're in. But there's really no peace. If you get what you want, you're either rapidly dissatisfied or you live in chronic anxiety for fear of losing whatever it is that you think you have. And this is stuff that cannot happen in spirit. There's no gain and loss in spirit. There are no changing conditions.
So in summary, you were saying that spiritual treasure will be more everlasting, and the treasures from the earth are eventually going to wither and go away, and we wouldn't have those.
Right. And even say, for example, things that we value. We value things because they seem to last. We value things because they somehow resemble perfection. And in Revelations in the Bible, where it says, I make all things new, a lot of us really celebrate. We lean towards things that are new. And part of that is because of its resemblance to the mortal sense of the divine idea.
So, Swami, I see that we have a few more verses from Matthew 6, and we have 21 to 24. And let's talk about Matthew 6:21 first, and I'll read that. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So if I'm not mistaken, it seems like there's some symbolism in there that we should be aware of.
Well, I think a big part of that is the physics of spirituality. The like attracts like. Material identity looks for what's visible and tangible. Astral mental identity looks for what's invisible but tangible. And spiritual identity looks for what's invisible and intangible. And like the Bible says, to love God with your heart, your soul, and your mind. Well, God is spirit. And so how can somebody be longing for a candy bar or a text or a phone call and at the same time have attention for what is invisible and intangible?
So, Swami, the next verse from Matthew 6, and that's 22 and 23. Do you want to read that for our listeners?
Yeah, the light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? That's the end of the quote. And I think this is just another way of saying sowing to the flesh or sowing to the spirit. If thine eye be single, meaning have we risen into the belief in the one, or evil, which is we've dropped back down into the belief in matter, the belief in two powers.
And then the last one, Matthew 6:24, is, no man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And that's the rest of the verse, and I believe you just said that.
And I kind of like the way that Mary Baker Eddy says it in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. You render the divine law of healing obscure and void when you weigh the human in the same scale as the spiritual, or limit in any direction of thought the omnipresence and omnipotence of God. Yeah, I think it comes down to think, feel, say, do one and the same thing. In this case, you really want to make sure what you love is invisible and intangible.
Well, with that, it is time to start closing down the show for today, so listeners, be sure to visit the website, www.ipdtransform.com. On the homepage, and you see the fading banner, Blog Talk Radio. If you click that, that directs you to the Blog Talk Radio show catalog page. And by clicking on the Products tab, then Online Classes directs you to all the classes that Swami has available. So with that, Swami, do you have any other final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and live abundantly. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.